Today we have Jonas Krause, who's going to talk to us about image processing with convolutional neural networks. So, Jonas. All right, thank you.
Oh yeah, PowerPoint.
Okay, guys. Good afternoon, everyone. As you know, my name is Jonas Krause. I was sitting in on this class on the beginning until we locked down my PhD topic, and after that, I've been focusing 100 on that, and it has to do with image classification. More specifically, using a deep learning model called convolutional neural networks. So I'm gonna talk to you a little bit of what I've been doing with those deep learning models, some experiments we did already, and how they work for image classification. I've been working with Dr. Lipiao Lim and Kyujin Baek. She's our vision computer specialist, and my advisor since the beginning, and now we are directing for a plant recognition project that it's kind of challenging, and that will be my PhD. So talking a little bit about image as data before we start on the model itself. And please, Professor, feel free to add any comments anytime, and if you have any questions or anything, please. Yeah. So the agenda, we're going to talk a little bit on this introduction on what the data is, especially grayscale image and color image, and make a comparison on what we see versus what the computer sees. And basically on two main data sets, the MNIST, which is handwrite of numbers, tiny images for classification, and the CIFAR. CIFAR has two types of data set, one with 10 classes, one with 100 classes, so there are two data sets there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how it was done previously, deep learning, or what I mean is how the image classification was done previous deep learning, and basically by extracting handcrafted features. And after that, I'm going to talk a little bit about deep learning. I know you guys have some videos available already. You probably saw those. So it's just to introduce deep learning, and then specifically about this model called convolutional neural network. And I'm going to go deeply on the architecture. I think it's important for us to understand what's going on each one of those layers, and how they are organized to produce discriminative features for the classification. And then I'm going to talk about a few successful CNN architectures, the ones that have been winning some challenges, that the more robust one with several parameters. And how we train, I'm going to talk a little bit about backpropagation, overfitting, regularization, and dropout, focusing on those models. And then some experiments that I did through these past years, talk a little bit about transfer learning, that it's kind of new for me and people are using it a lot, and maybe we're going to use it in this topic as well. And then I'm going to present some complex networks that like the ones that Google are using, that are really huge ones, and how they came up to those things. So for the introduction, first, what's going to be image classification? Basically, it's taking an image and outputting a class or a probability of classes, right? So right now we can see that if you're going to have a network that will just output true or false, you're going to be just outputting a class, 0 or 1. It's going to be one neuron in the end. Or if you have more classes, you're going to output some probability of each one of those classes. And for human, this task is one of the first skills that we learn. And I put this image here because you guys are already doing it without even knowing, right? You're looking to those images and you're already classifying. You're seeing some green one on the beginning. You are assuming that it's a tree or plants. You see some coffee machines, some cars over there, some boats, and you are already classifying in your mind because you have a prior knowledge for that, right? You learn that through all day to recognize shapes, and you put all together to recognize those images. But recognize patterns and prior knowledge and different imaging environments are difficult for machines to classify. There's a lot of variations on that. So how the computer sees. Over here I put a simple image on a grayscale, and if you focus on a little tile of it, you're gonna see and zoom in. What the computer sees actually are values from 0 to 255. Those are the intensity of each one of those pixels. So in a dark region like that, the values of the pixels should be lower. But if you go to a region that is white, then it's going to be nearby 255. Yeah.
So it's basically a 2D array?
Yeah, it's a 2D array. When you are dealing with grayscale images, right? We're going to talk about color images in a bit. So I'm going to start with the most simple kind of images. There are grayscale. They are only one. They are 2D matrices. And the data set that have this tiny image with handwrite numbers, it's called n-minst. And you actually can, I think I have on internet here, right?
Yeah.
So this for, it says here, right? There you go. So I found these ones very interesting because they keep the data set right here, so you can download it, the training image, the test images, and they also have a list, a rank of which classifier was used, how they are pre-processing, and the test rate error for them. So for this data set, we have 60,000 training images and 10,000 test examples. The rankings and errors are there, and the current best accuracy, it's on 99.77. It means that they can recognize almost every single image from the test. So it's getting very good results, and they are using, if we go there and check which of those methods, here you have the error. So if you're going to check here which is the smallest error, you're going to see that it's the 0.23, which is actually the 99.77, and it's done by a convolutional neural network, right? So you have the size of the convolution, all the details here, and you guys can check that out later. So let's focus on those convolutional neural networks. So how we're gonna use those data to train a network and then classify those images. So the data basically have 28 by 28 pixels. It's a matrix like that, and you can see the 8 right here in the middle, represented by the large numbers. Generally, you probably saw the backpropagation video that professors sent you guys, and they use the same example. And over there, what they do is use an input layer of 784 pixels. So over here, we're going to do differently. Instead of using all that as input layer, we're going to convolute, which means look at specific local regions of the image and try to take some discriminative features from there. The next data set, let's change to a color image now. So we kind of already knew how the grayscale image is. It's a 2D matrix, as you said, and how it's going to be for the colorful ones. So this data set also has 60,000, but it's 32 by 32 color images, which means that each one of these images, to be colorful, it's a cubic matrix of depth 3. Instead of being a 2D matrix, it's now a 3D matrix with 3 as depth. On the depth you have red, green, and blue. It means that you can split this RGB image into 3 different matrices. And if you look, that's an interesting point, because So the first one is the red with 2 points, all the reds, the greens, and the blues. But if you look at individually, they look like a grayscale matrix. So the first one, you can see that the more intensity pixels, the white pixels represent the red. Same thing over here. The apples here are not so green, so these are the part green more, so it's more light, bright here, and the same thing on the blue here. It is important for us to know that because we're going to handle with this type of data now. The data we're going to be working on, they are 3D matrix with M rows and columns and three dimensions on the depth, red, green, blue. Okay, so the way that was being done previous decades before deep learning, we generally extract handcrafted features, which mean that we use the image to and some formulas to extract values from there, and these values can represent several things, like the histogram, entropy, some co-occurrence matrix, gray level runs, and there's a bunch of them, right? So what we had to do previous deep learning is to construct our set of features. So if you want to look for something specific, want a shape, you can extract that handcraft feature shape and compare those data to do the classification. Basically, you have texture features and morphological features. So what you had to do previously is select, so you have to know which would be the most discriminative features and select those. Or do as most of people do, extract as much as you can, and then try to find the most discriminative one through principal component analysis or something like that. But that's not the focus of the talk here. This is what we used to do. Now we have some deep learning methods. So the deep learning will learn those features automatically for us, so we don't need to hand design them. I put some details here about deep learning. There is a site called deeplearning.net that has a lot of interesting things, and they state that deep learning as a new area of machine learning, that it's closer to original goals of artificial intelligence. And some key concepts for the deep neural networks is the depth of it. So the number of layers, we're going to have more hidden layers. Instead of just one, which is a normal neural network, you have the input layer, one layer in the middle, and one output layer. You have more than one layer hidden in the middle. So basically what's happening here is that we are learning features from the learned features. So the first layer, we collect some more simple features, and from there we're going to extract more complex one and more complex one, and use those really complex ones to do the classification. So any network who has more than 3 layers, it's considered then a deep neural network. And as it said here, the next layer will learn more complex features from the previous layer, and so on, until we get a really good discriminative set of features extracted automatically, and those will be used for classification. Okay, so we have different models. This picture that you see, it's called a deep neural network, which is a normal neural network with more hidden layers. There's different types of different models, like the deep Boltzmann machine, which focus on the calculation of probability. And if you get one simple deep Boltzmann machine with just one layer, you get a restricted Boltzmann machine, and you can add them up to create a deep belief network. And using deep belief network, you can create autoencoders. Those are not the focus of the presentation, but I saw you guys have some presentations about it on the site. There's also the recurrent neural networks, which are not the focus, but they are starting to mix them up. So the big networks, the most state-of-the-art ones have mixed blocks. not only convolution, not only recurrent, but they are mixing them up. But the focus here are the convolution neural networks. So what are they, right? So they are, first, they take a biological inspiration on the virtual cortex. It's kind of interesting to study something like that and see how it relates to our own brain, because that was the inspiration of it. And for example, we got a picture here of our brain. You get, it's kind of our eyes will be the input layer. And back here on the visual cortex, some neurons will be fired, will be on when some shapes when you recognize some shapes like vertical edges or horizontal or diagonal ones. So that is the basis of convolutional neural networks. Recognize those edges, those tiny areas, and use them to reconstruct general data and classify them. Okay, this is let's talk a little bit about the architecture. So this is a very simple architecture. When you get, notice that it's a gray scale image here. So it's just one 2x2 window here that you're gonna be checking through the whole image, and that will produce feature maps. And these feature maps are produced by these filters that go through the whole image, and depending on the filter, you create different feature maps. And that's one thing when you're creating your convolutional neural network, you kind of have to know how many feature maps you're going to extract. So it's not so intuitive, just create a network, because if you create a bunch of filters, you're not going to use, you're wasting your time. If you have just not enough filters, maybe that will not be enough to do the classification accurately. After the convolution layer that I'm going to explain in details for you in a few seconds, we generally have a subsampling. So you try to reduce the number of features to collect only the most representative ones. And from that, again, a convolution, and then a subsampling, and in the end, we get a fully connected layer that will do the classification. So let's talk about the convolution layer itself. I think that's the most interesting part of the presentation, because we're going to understand what actually is happening on those layers. So basically, there is a convolution operator for each layer that will calculate this formula over here, which is nothing more than the image that you are using or trying to classify, and the filter. This filter it's how the convolutional neural net works. So this filter is used in a slide window through the whole image, as you can see on the animated GIF over here. So it starts on the top left and goes right. So it goes sweeping the whole image, and the multiplication of those filters and that area that it's looking, it's outputting what we call convolved feature or feature map, right? So this is a very simple example where you have a this is not even an image, it's just an example, right? But you can imagine your image, your big image with all the data and the filter sweeping around it. So this is a nice example. Imagine that you have a filter like this one that you want to see if your image has that kind of feature. In this case, a curve. So this curve here can be represented like these values over here. When you have a 7x7 matrix, this is my filter then, and these 30 values here represent exactly this curve. And when I sweep this filter through the image, when it gets to a region that it recognizes, like this one here, it's gonna compare then the filter with the area of my image. And if they are alike, you're gonna see that, so this area will be something like that, right? Could be other values, you know. and you're gonna multiply the area of your image through the filter, and if they match each other, it's gonna be a huge number, a large number, which will make the neuron fire up, or it says, okay, I recognize that filter in this area over here. Using the same filter, if you go through it, it may not recognize. If you go through this area, you can see that the numbers here multiplied by the filter will have 0, so will not fire up that area. Didn't recognize that shape in that part of the image. So like that, we're going to use several filters. Each one of these filters will create one layer of the feature map. So I have some examples here. If you have an input like this, I don't even know which animal is that. If you have something like that, you can use a filter of identity. Will not change much, but it's just to give you guys an idea of how the feature looks like, right? So most of the times you're gonna have features for edge detection, like these ones. When you go through the image with those features, if it point out where those edges are. Same thing for other types of filters. So this is it's an animated example. So you can see two filters here, a red and a green one. So the first one, the red, it's the diagonal to the left. You can see it sweeping through the whole image and creating this feature map right here. Using another feature, another filter, it will create another feature map. And like that, you have several feature maps of your image, which will indicate where you have those types of filters or those types of edges. So when you go to the colorful image, so everything I was talking, it was for the gray value images when you have only a 2D matrix. And you guys can imagine that for a colorful image, it's gonna be, we have to go through each one of the channels, the red, green, and blue. So it's the same work done for one matrix done on each one of the depth dimensions. And in the end, we sum them up. So in this, that's how it works for colorful image, and basically it's going through this formula here, where you have the product of the filter and the image, and you sum them all for the height, the width, and the depth. You also add a bias here, which is also trainable. And the sigma here represents a nonlinear function, which is the activation function, that it's part of the convolutional block. So what it's doing, you can see here on the animated GIF, you get an image. We got 3 kernel features here for channel 1, channel 2, and channel 3, and goes sliding the window through the image to collect these feature maps here. Okay. You can also notice that in this specific example, there is a border of 0 in there, right? So that's one thing we're going to talk about. That's called padding, because you want to analyze the corner of the images as well. So if you start just on the top left without considering this padding, you are not looking right there to the corners. So you have this extra area here just to extract features from the corners. Any questions here? Cool. Okay. So this is an important concept. When you understand what's going on here, you understand more than half of what a convolutional neural network is. It's those filters making the job of collecting important features for you to classify later. And the good thing is that those filters, they are learned through the training process. You can set them up if you want to specifically detect an edge that you know that you're going to use. You can set them up, but most of them you just let to be trained. So the network will create the most discriminative features, and when you're looking to new images for classify, it will be looking for those filters that you trained. And but it doesn't do everything by itself. So now the things get a little more complicated because we have to set a lot of things. First, we have to set the number of filters. And as I told you, we're not sure how many filters we're gonna need, right? So what people do is generally they try a bunch of filters and keep reducing it until you have a good number of them, but that's kind of try and error. And that comes up the idea of evolve the whole thing to get the right number of filters. Another parameter that we have to set, it's called the size of the filter. So on this first animation here, you can see the blue part is the image and the green part is the filter. And you have a filter of 5 by 5, which is a common size filter. You have 3 by 3, 2 by 2, but you don't get too much, otherwise you're not looking to areas, you're looking to the whole image. So generally, you have to set that up. So what is the right number to set? I don't know. It depends on how, what you're looking at the data. Are you looking to tiny windows or looking to bigger windows? So it's one thing that you have to set as well. The other one is the padding. That's what I was telling you about how to analyze the corners of the image. So you add zeros here. So when you go doing the convolutional process over it, you cover the corners as well as you did here, as it's doing right there. And one thing that it's so far we got a filter 5 by 5 here, 5 by 5 as well, and we need to set also a stride. The common stride is 1, where we just jump 1 pixel to the right and to the end, go to the next line, 1 pixel to the right and to the end. But you may not need to look to all the pixels, all images produced by those windows. You may want to jump around and get just do not overlap them too much, and then you increase the number of the strides. And in that case, you're going to be jumping instead of 1 pixel, maybe 2, 3. But an important thing here is that when you set up these parameters, you get to keep in mind that they will create those feature maps. And they will change size of the feature maps depending on the padding and the stride. You can see here the filter, instead of being 5 by 5, it's a 3 by 3 covering the same image. So you're extracting less features here, but if they are representative enough, maybe that's good because you don't need all those. You can do the same job with these guys here. So that's now how to create these networks and select the right number of features and padding and stride is still been doing by try and error. So you can imagine the work that you're gonna have to create a network that you keep trying all those. So generally what people do is use a structure that you already know that it's success, or you know that it's working, and you adapt or use and use to your data set specifically. So after you do the convolution layer here, you get all the feature maps. Let me go back here a little right. So right here, so you get this first part here, you create those features maps on the first layer, doing the filters over the image. After that, it's introduced an activation function. The role of this function is to add some non-linearity to the network, and we are even discussing how simple this function is and how useful it is. Basically, what it's doing, it's ignoring all negative values and setting to 0, and keeping all the positive values. It doesn't look much now, but if you see the example, you're kind of gonna understand what's going on here. So this is one of those images that use a filter over it. So you put feature map. The black are the negative ones and the white are the positives here, and we use this activation function to get just the positive ones, because these ones will be the most discriminative ones. Those are the ones that we really want on our feature maps. Oh, and I'm using this simple function here called rectified linear unit because it's one of the most popular. You're gonna see on the literature that most of them are using them, but you can use hyperbolic tangent or sigmoid as well. So the next layer will be a pooling layer. After you have, so far we talked about the convolutional layer and the activation layer. And I generally call that as a convolutional block because you're generally going to see a convolutional layer with an activation together. And when you see a block like this, it's a block of the convolutional features with a convolutional layer on it already. Some people call it activation layer, but it's not actually a layer, it's just a function over the layer. So you can understand this block here by the use of the convolutional and the activation layer. After you pass to the same, to the first layer of convolution, you get this block of features maps, something like that, and you want to reduce them to get just the most representative ones. And you do that by doing a subsampling. And notice that this subsampling reduces the size of each feature map, but it doesn't reduce the depth, right? You're not losing any feature map here, you're just reducing them. And the way that it's done, it's generally using a max function. So here you have a simple example. Imagine that this is one of your feature maps extracted by the sliding windows, and you're gonna subsample it, getting the max values of each one of these squares. For example, for the first square, max value 6, second square, value 8, and so on. Notice that I'm also using a stride here. So that's another parameter that you have to keep in mind, right? Is the stride of the pooling layer. So there's a stride of the convolution layer, there's a stride of the pooling layer. They can be different as well. So let's see if you guys understood. If I have a stride of 1 here, how it's going to be the size of this output? So this is size 2, right? So I take these and jump 2. I take these and jump 2. I take these and jump 2. If I have a stride of 1, I will take these and jump 1. I'll take these and jump 1. So if I change this stride from 2 to 1, this is not going to be a 2 by 2. It's going to be a
4 by 4.
Almost 1, 2, 3, right?
3 by 3.
3 by 3, exactly. Well, you can implement padding or other things too. If you really, really want a 4 by 4, you can do it, right? You can add a padding over here and do it like that. So that's actually a good thing because you can model the quantity of features or the size of the features maps as you want. So you keep reducing them until you have the most discriminative ones. Okay, to finish the architecture, the last layer is called a fully connected layer, which is actually a normal network, which is this last part over here. So I put this picture here that represents a general convolutional neural network, where you have a color image. You can see that it's color because you have 3 dimensions here. It's not colorful, but it's supposed to be, right? And you can see now what I was talking about, the convolutional blocks. So the first one is the convolution with the activation layer, and what it's doing, it's sweeping through the whole image. Each one of those filters are creating future maps on that. From this group of features, we reduce subsampling, pulling them down. So we reduce to those guys and keep doing that as many times as you want, right? Of course, if you do it forever, it gets in a point that you don't have enough features to do a classification. So you have to stop somewhere. And there's no right way to say stop here. So that's why you have a bunch of different architectures, because anyone can create a different one. And the real trick here is that if you create one that it does not represent well the features, the accuracy of that network is going to be low. Even being a convolutional neural network, if it's not set properly, it will not yield good results. So the whole thing now on these methods is how to create a really good network for your data set, right? So it will depend on what size of image or type of image you are analyzing and which one of them you want to classify. In the end, after you use the convolutional block subsampling, to start the classification, what generally is done is this convolutional block is flattened, so all the neurons are lined up in one only dimension, because the next one is going to be a fully connected one to classify on an output layer, generally with a soft max on it. And over here, it's going to output the percentage of each one of those classes. Okay. So I found this online. I thought it was very interesting because it's kind of a formula of the architecture, right? It's let's see if you guys can follow me here. So basically, you can see the convolutional block right here, which is the convolutional layer and the activation layer, and you can have n of them, right? Notice that the pooling layer, it's after it. So you don't need to have a pooling layer for each convolutional block. You can have a convolutional block extracting simple features, and then another convolution block extracting more complex features from that simple features, and so on. Generally, this n goes from 0 to 3, right? So when you have networks that you really have to take complex features, maybe it's a good idea to use more than one convolutional block at the time. And so you got the convolutional block, n convolutional blocks, and then you add a pooling layer, and you can have this whole structure several times as well, m times then. So this first part here represents all the convolutional blocks and all the features that you're extracting. After that comes to the fully connected one, also with activation function or not, and you can have several of them. Generally, again, it's one or two, and then the output layer. But then you get some interesting settings here. For example, if you get like just input and the fully connected one, you get a linear classifier. It's a normal network. If you have one convolutional block, that's you're extracting just one group of features and using that as classifier. That's not so deep. So generally, what people do, they repeat those blocks, like this one. This is the most common one, where you have a convolutional block and a pooling layer repeated twice. That's the network I was showing to you so far. The first network I showed, it was just those blocks, and then the full convolutional, the full connected one. And as I was telling you, you can have these convolutional blocks and then another convolutional block before the pooling. Those are very useful for more complex and deeper features. I'm going to show you an example right now. So this is one example of one network, and what it's actually seeing, what is actually viewing on each one of the blocks. And you can see that the convolutional and activation layer are repeated twice, right? So it's extracting some features from this image here, activating, and from this activated and extracting other features and activating again. So it's really reinforcing where the most of the features that the activation function detected twice, right? So first and then the second, and then pulling out, and then using again, right? And then pulling out, and then again. You can see that the features that is being extracted here is going to get more and more complex as you go deep into the network, right? Until you get to the end that you have a fully connected one. So for this network, following that taxonomy, you have the input, and then the convolutional block times 2, right? You guys can see that, right? These two here, and then the pooling. And these all is repeated 3 times. Okay, so that was one of the ideas on maybe, I don't know which the values of of M, N, and K are the best ones for my data. So the idea was to evolve one of those networks by trying all them, but it gets to very complicated area, right? But it's one possibility here. If you don't know, you can try 1, 2, or even a combination of them. Okay, so in summary, a CNN in a simplest case is a list of layers that transform the image into an output, generally class scores. And there are a few distinct types of layers. The most common ones are the convolutional, the activation, the pooling, and the full connected one. Nothing, you can mix them up the way that you want, but those are the architectures that are more famous and used more commonly. And also, each layer may or may not have parameters, like the convolutional and fully connect have the size of them, and the activation and pool no. And they also have some hyperparameters. Depends on the layer, like convolution, fully connect, and pool have, and the activation no. So these hyperparameters could be the stride, the padding, all those kind of things. So let's see some interesting ones, right? So now we have a good overview of the architecture itself, and let's see what networks were already created and how they work. So the first one, it's a very simple, I found that comment online and it was very interesting, and I agree totally. This is an excellent first architecture for a CNN. So you can see here that it's just input as a gray scale image, right? And then you have one convolutional layer with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 feature maps, and one pooling, one convolution, one pooling, and then go for the full connected one. And we can see it working right here. So it was already trained, so it knows which filters to look on the image, and this is what it's seeing in each one of the convolutional layers. So this first one is what is seen on this convolutional layer. You can see that it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, one for each feature map, right? So first feature map, it's getting those edges there. The second on these, and so on. After that, you go to a subsampling and a convolution again. So this second column here shows you what this second convolution is seeing now. Right? You still can, looking at it, have an idea of what number it is if you look just at that convolution. But if you go deeper to the next one, which is this one right here, the fully connected one, you cannot identify visually what's going on anymore. But the computer knows which of those features are good for the recognized 2, 3, 4, and so on. So when you keep showing these handwriting images, you can see that it doesn't matter if it's a little bit up or down, or they are even sliding, so you can see that it already recognizes when you get here, 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 or here, right? So you can see that you get some question marks in the middle, in the changing between one and another, but it's recognizing all of them. So they got the state-of-the-art one is on 99.77, so we have to, yeah, that's really good. You have to like try to find someone that it will not recognize, right? So this is the LeNet 5. It's called 5 because you have 5 layers in here. So this is another famous one. It's called AlexNet, and it's winning the ImageNet large-scale visual recognition challenge. That's in 2012. I just gonna say that once, and then I'm always gonna refer as though that acronym in there, ILSVRC. But I focus on that because a lot of new networks are being tested on these challenges, and they use the CFAR data sets, so it's very interesting. So this is the AlexNet. So you have the input layer here, and then it goes for these convolutional blocks on this specific size. And in the end, you get the fully connected ones, and the last one output you get 1,000 classes, so it's for the CFAR 100 that you have 1,000 classes as output here. So this is a very interesting one, and this was the first convolutional neural network that I worked. So I'm going to show you some experiments, but what I did, it's instead of creating everything from scratch, I basically adapted the first layer here by adding padding, or basically getting my image and feeding it into this first layer. Didn't change anything on these layers because those are dimensions that we know that are working. They were well tested, and I didn't need 1,000 classes anymore. So I also take this layer out and add another one with just the classes that I wanted. So that was my first experiment, and it was very interesting. And I'm going to show you some results in a few slides. Let me show another one. So this is the VGGNet. You can see that you have more convolutional blocks now, right? So the idea is to extract more features in here, and you can see that the input layer also is bigger, right? So you have more pixels or inputting in here than the previous one. This is a small comparison. There's two versions of the VGGNet. The 16 and 19 is basically the number of layers on each one, but it's a nice comparison between the AlexNet that we saw previously and the other ones. The VGG, you can see that they keep growing, right? So the first LeNet 5 was just 5, then AlexNet has more, and now VGG has more. And those are the most common ones. And after now we have an idea of how the architectures of the convolutional neural network are. We know which of those blocks and what they are doing. And now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to train those, right? Now you have this huge architecture, several layers, and how you're going to train. So I was preparing myself to talk about backpropagation because it's very interesting. And but I know that a professor sent us a video about it that was, in my opinion, the best video I saw the last few years. The animations are great, so if you guys didn't see it yet, take a look on it. So I'm gonna pass more quick here. Yeah, you all guys. So take a look on the video. It's very interesting. I'm gonna go faster here since you get all the explanation in details there. There's one or two details that are different here that I'm gonna focus on, but most of the part is pretty much the same. So basically, the backpropagation is an algorithm to calculate the weights and bias, and we're gonna do that through a cost function that is the square difference between the target and what you output. This is a supervised learning here. And basically, what are we going to do? It's minimize the gradient of this function here, which is, it's missing something here. Real fast, real fast, real fast. There you go. Okay. Oh. Sorry about that. Okay, back on track. There you go. So basically, what are you doing? It's calculating the derivative of this function in relation of the weights, right? On the video, they do explain, they open this derivative showing exactly what are you updating, so it's kind of interesting to see that. But I put this graphic here just to represent, so what you're doing, it's the gradient descent. You're going to find this value here where in relation of the weights, so minimizing the error. And other parameters, so after you have this gradient, what you're going to do is update the weights. And the way that you do that, it's the new weight is going to be the initial one minus a learning rate and this derivative. So this learning rate, it's another parameter that we have to set also. And basically what it does, it goes, it's the size of the step that it takes through the optimum value here on the weights and loss. So if you took, generally what I do, it's you put a high learning rate to test it on the beginning to see if it's going where you want it to go, and then you reduce it to be more detailist and specific. I use 0.01. We were talking about the learning rate, but again, it's you can set it just to see how it goes. So after you train it, you may have a problem of overfitting. In that case, the model did learn perfectly all the samples, but it didn't generalize it as we want. So in this example here, we have the blue dots are the training set. You can have them, you can see them here. And you have a target function, which is actually the sign function. So that is you guys can see that in orange, right? And what happened is that if you let it run freely, you can come out with a polynomial of degree 14, for example. That is this purple one, right? It's fitting right perfectly. It got all the training examples. But if you came up with a new one right here, you're gonna see that it will not generalize it. So this kind of thing generally happen when you don't have enough data to train. Right, so you let it flow it around, and it doesn't generalize them. So that's I just put it in here because that's an important topic on deep learning. It's not only convolutional neural networks. Any deep learning method, you're gonna need a lot of data to avoid those kind of things, to have a well-trained one. Yeah.
If you have a lot of data, if you maybe run too much of the same thing on the same data set, you can have that.
Yeah, that's a good observation. You're totally right. So that's why we have a regularization, right? So that's one point that it's a little bit different here, and I took a while to understand this, and it's very interesting the way that it works. On the beginning, looks like it's black box, and I was not sure it was going to work. But after I read about it, I now agree, basically by the fact that this regularization on the network, instead of keep changing the parameters, we do it during the training process, which is called dropout. This dropout basically take probability and take some neurons out during the training. And you kind of seem strange to take some neurons out, because you may think that you are doing a bad thing to the network. But when you take some neurons out, you force it to cope with failure and to learn through other neurons. So it doesn't focus on only that neuron specifically. So like that, you can you rely more on a consensus of several neurons instead of just one. So that will avoid the overfeeding. So let's see what was done already. What I did, right? So, okay. First experiments. I was working with malaria thin blood smears. And I collect those data from the World Health Organization and the Center for Disease and Control. And they are images like that. So what I did, I manually segmented by 50 by 50. So I picked this 50 by 50 because I noticed that most of the red blood cells fit into a 50 by 50, right? That's one problem that we're gonna have a lot, that it's the multi-scale. In this case, they all fitted in 50 by 50, so it was I didn't have much problem on that. So what I did, I adapted the AlexNet, as I told you. I used the padding here, so this 50 by 50 will fit on this first layer, and the last layer here, now I changed it from 1,000 classes for 3 classes, which is healthy, Plasmodium falciparum infected, and Plasmodium vivax infected. But like that, like that, I can classify. I can give the convolutional neural network a new or a unseen red blood cell and ask if it's infected or not. But I don't want to see just one. I wanted to sweep through the whole smear to try to identify where are they and how many of them are. So so you have an idea, these are the future maps that it was learned from the convolutional neural network. You cannot see much on these futures, but you can try to see in a few of them. You see that they are looking for a dot, black dot there, that is exactly what it's supposed to be, the parasite, right? So like these, you can see here. So those are the features that it learned on the training. And then when I show it a new one, it's gonna see if it fits on those filters. Oh, it does, so oh, it's that class or it's that other class. So using that same convolutional idea of sweep the whole image, I use the convolutional neural network to take a look on every 50 by 50 possible window of the image. So go through all of it, right? So each one of these will output me a pixel telling me it's infected or not infected. So through using all these images, one by one into the CNN, I got an output of 3D matrix. On the first one staying all the healthy ones, the second one all infected by the first parasite, and the third one infected by the second parasite. And these are the results. Oh, it's green there, it's blue here, okay. But it works. So you can see that the red arrows are the ground through, so, and the blue-green area is the area detected as infected. So this is one network that can already substitute one of the microscope guys who are manually counting all those infected ones. You know, over here, you know, it's easy to count, but imagine do that every day through huge images. You get tired, you lost count, and you know, it's good to have an automatic process for that. So that was the first try using a well-known CNN structure, the convolutional neural network. And now the project that we are working on, it's called plant recognition, and the challenge is to work with natural images with natural backgrounds. So it's getting much more harder to extract the features, and we are relying on the deep learning to do that for us. And for that, the first step is we're going to segment it to try to identify where the plants are on a natural image. And we are using a pre-trained model on that data set. So ADE20K, it's another data set who has this image and this ground truth. So this is already available. We trained the network over these data here. And the network is something like that. Oh, things are getting scary now, right? So instead of one convolutional neural network well established in there, we can start to stack them, right? Generally to look on different things. So the first one is looking for stuff string, this one is looking for object, and they mix them up together to have a final scene segmentation. Right? It's used a lot for multi-scale as well, because you can have different sizes over here, so you can look on different scales in there. These are some initial results. This is one of the image, and we get it segmented and tiled up. So those will be each one of these tiles. You can already imagine what is the size of these tiles, huh? What do you think? It's going to be the same size that I did it previously. I have it all implemented already. I did it already for 50 by 50 here, right? You know, so the idea was to get the same. I think 50 by 50 is not only valid for the red blood cell, is actually a very representative and used a lot. If you look at the AlexNet, they use 55, so it's pretty much the same. And smaller than that, I think it's too tiny. Maybe there's not enough information in there. And much bigger than that, the network will explode. It's get huge. So I think it's a fair number to pick. And those tiles will be used then to train a network and classify them. So, but you can see that sometimes it's challenging, right? Especially if you want to work with natural image with those massive backgrounds. You cannot rely only on color now to segment it. So again, we are relying on deep learning methods to do that for us. That's the first step. So next step will be use those styles and try to classify. And when you have a new image, we're gonna check if those styles are on the image and classify through that. Okay. Another thing that people are using a lot, and I think it's very interesting, it's called transfer learning. So if you get a new network and you're going to train it from scratch, it takes a long time, a lot of computer effort to do it. And you don't need to do from scratch. You can use filters that were already learned on other data sets. For detect edges, for example, vertical, horizontal edges, they're going to be the same independent on the data set. So I can use that learning already, or that network that was trained on a specific data set and fine tune it. So the way that it goes, it's kind of like this. So you load the pre-trained network. So notice that I don't say that it's a specific network, so it could be any network. It could be from LINET, AlexNet, or any one of VGGNet. So if you can use that pre-trained. And what you're gonna do, generally what people do is get a network that was trained on those big C4 data sets with 1 million of image and 1,000 of classes. So you get a big one and you reduce for what you want to do. So you take out the fully connected layers, right? So you have only the convolutional and subsampling blocks or extracting all those features, and then you retrain it using your data. So these last layers here, now I can train, for example, with 100 image. Imagine that I only have 100 images. It's not going to be enough to train the whole network. So I can use a pre-trained one and fine-tune it for my classes then. So a lot of people are using that, and I see a bunch of papers that they just did that. And I think that's not much enough, you know? They kind of get everything ready and just train the last layer. It's kind of, you know, cheating. It's cheating. I wouldn't say cheating, but you're right, it's cheating. But it's a good way to start, right? You don't need to start from scratch. Okay, so the last topic here, it's I want to show you actually the state-of-the-art ones, the more complex networks, and you're gonna see that they are getting huge, right? They are a mix of every type of layer, but notice that each one of them, all of them, has convolutional blocks. So they are using everything that we talk, the filters and everything, in a way. In some parts of the network. So the first one, it's a actually, it's a convolution neural network, but all this part here until the middle, it's the same thing. But instead of using a fully connected layer to classify, you can deconvolute it or open them back up. And what you're gonna have, the final prediction, it's a generalization of what you were seeing. This is a nice example that I got from us using a CT image, because they are used a lot on biomedical images to pinpoint tumors, cancer, or all those kind of things. Right? It's very, very interesting. And I did.
It's more like a generative.
Yeah, it is. And I did my literature review on it, and I found some of them because you can have 3D CT scans, right? Yeah. And that's and then they output the final prediction, a 3D visualization of it. Yeah, that's kind of interesting, right? Because and you can also output 3D because you get all trained, right? Yeah. So you can output a generalization in 3D from a 2D image.
Sure.
That's was very interesting papers I read about it, and they were all focusing on biomedical images. Hey, no problem. So here you got, for example, the Google net. Yeah. So it was the winner of 2010 challenge, the ImageNet Large Scale Visual Recognition Challenge. Oh, I remember. And it's a huge network. You can not even see what those blocks are, so I will rise them up. I will zoom them up. First, notice that several of these blocks are repeated. They called inception models, right? So all the blue blocks are the convolutional ones. You got pooling and softmax in red and yellow, and some normalized blocks. But let's take a look on the inception mode itself. So it's kind of a network inside of a network, right? The way I think that they came up with this is they start with a small one on this side and say, hey, maybe we can repeat that. Yeah, let's do that. Hey, let's do that like several times, and that's how they came up with this. So you can see that the inception mode, it's stacked CNN. So you got the input from the previous layer or the input layer, go for one by one convolutional, and over here also. And you can see that it changed the size of the windows exactly for the multi-scale purpose, right? You get some maxing pool and so on. Going forward, so that was 2014. 2015, the winner of that challenge was a network called ResNet, which used residual blocks. The network is so huge, it didn't even fit on the screen. So, yeah, the VGG19, just a comparison here, you get all line up, and then 34 layer in plane, and then you get a 34 layer with residual. This residual is nothing more than add the image after it gets the features also. So you keep extracting features from the same image several times until you have the most representative ones. So there you go. Oh, that's huge.
Wow.
Yeah, this is the residual block. So you guys know what's going on in there. So each one of these guys here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's doing this residual block here. Basically, yeah, it's doing a convolutional, normalization, activation, convolutional, and you pass the whole identity to there as well. So it's kind of looking several times to the same image.
Yeah.
This is the most new ones. I'm not so familiar with that yet. They are brand new, the 2016 winning. It's called Fast Region-Based CNN. You can see that you have all the convolutional layers in here, and they proposed it's a region proposed network that will try to indicate to the CNN where to look. But again, using all convolutional layers in here to extract the features. And this one is this year winner. It just came out. It's called CNet or CResNet. So you can see that they keep adding stuff on it, right? It's not like brand new one. It's just convolutional blocks. You can see the C's there, the convolutional blocks. But between one and another, they add this squeeze and excitation function that actually are the inception nodes in the middle in there. So this idea of inception nodes is getting very famous because of Google, of course. But the whole trick here is that they use inceptual residual blocks as models. So what we saw previously, they are fitting in up here, and they are adding that things in the middle. So that was the winner of this year. And that's pretty much it. I put it to finish here a picture on to give you an idea on how the convolutional neural network is actually seeing an image, right? So you can see that it's analyzing and each window, right, through the whole image. And that's pretty much it. You guys have questions, any comments?
Questions? Can you go back a few slides?
Sure.
Yep. So in the left side where they identify 2 steps after weight layer, what are the other things exactly?
So those two represent the same thing. Okay, so this weight layer, it's actually the convolution and the batch normal. The activation layer is right here in the middle. It's just two different way of representing. I like the right side more because you can see each one of the layers. But the only thing that they are doing is it's kind of a small network here, right? That part is a small network that takes some features from that, and they add the input as well. So it's kind of looking several times to the same.
So that addition is actually.
Yeah, it's adding. Yeah, it's adding them. So you kind of enhance the features, right? Every time you go to a residual block.
The left side is actually computing the features, and then you're actually adding that back in the image to kind of strengthen that feature. Exactly.
And then the filters will confirm if that actually is the features that you wanted.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. They are using a lot. It's
that makes sense.
Yeah. I think the presentation will be available for you guys. Send you guys so you can review it whenever you want.
You can watch again.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Let me stop recording.